Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with.
Hello, I am Violet Gray, stand-up comic, forever GM, and TTRPG enthusiast.
Hmm. And today we're going to talk about Lost Omens, Knights of Lastwall, a 128-page Pathfinder Second Edition source book. We're excited to talk about it. I love how, in a way, this book follows very closely to Book of the Dead, the last book we reviewed together. Um, it's a good companion piece. For those of you who are hearing about this book for the first time, it pretty much the Knights of Lastwall were the last force of good that were keeping the Whispering Tyrant in bay, and the Whispering Tyrant broke free from its prison, nearly destroyed most of the order, and this book details how you could be one of them, the different factions that exist now because of this.
Right.
What are your thoughts about this?
I would agree that Book of the Dead is a great companion piece. So, for people who are just getting into the Pathfinder mythos, there are three major events that happen. One is Earthfall, which is the cataclysm that creates the Pathfinder universe. The other one is the imprisonment of Robogug, who is the apocalyptic deity. The destruction of Lastwall, is arguably the third most important thing that happens in the Pathfinder mythos. Uh, like you were saying, Tar-Baphon. For those of you who are new to the Pathfinder universe, Tar-Baphon is basically the arch villain of the story. And I think that if you're wanting to run a game in the Pathfinder mythos, Knights of Lastwall is almost like a mini campaign setting. It deals with the most important plot in the Pathfinder setting pretty directly. And so, yeah, and since Tar-Baphon is a lich and his minions are mostly undead, I think that the Book of the Dead is an excellent supplement to this.
Mm. And also, it seems like Pathfinder is putting out books that are very linked together, like Absalom, the setting book that came out maybe a few months ago. Is also sort of linked to this because a lot of what the Whispering Tyrant once he was freed, one of the things he did was attack Absalom and try to take
Yes.
the Starstone magic item, I believe it's called.
Yes, he attempted to take the Starstone, which would allow him to ascend to godhood the way that Aradin, the god of the humans, did. There's also a substantial link to Absalom because not a lot of the Knights of Lastwall fled to Absalom, and they have an embassy in Absalom. And one of the Knights of Lastwall is actually prominent in the government of Absalom. He's one of the main. And so they go into the tie-in there. And so there's also potential if you want to do something that spans, say, from Absalom to Lastwall. There's some very direct connections there.
Mm. So let's talk about there's four parts to this book. Chapter one is the introduction. Pretty much gives you it's only 14 pages, but there's a lot of history happening there. Chapter two deals with Among the Knights, which is pretty much talking about the factions within the Knights of Lastwall. And what does it mean to be a knight exactly, which we'll get into in a bit. Chapter three is Knights of Lastwall options. Obviously, everyone loves options for the characters, if this is the section. Right. And then chapter four, which I think is also very important, Knights of Lastwall efforts, which tells you how to build stories based on what's in here. So let's briefly talk about the first one, the introduction. It's interesting reading something like this because usually a lot of books out there they want to convince you to be part of something, and usually it's like a very glorious, epic thing. But this is a story that begins with tragedy.
Yes, yes.
It's not, you're not joining the Avengers. You're joining something like pretty much this comic book reference, like the last days of the Justice Society.
Right. Hmm.
What are your thoughts about the introduction?
I would agree. I think that the victories mean nothing without the tragedies. You've not accomplished things if the heroes always win. And this is arguably the greatest tragedy in the modern story. And I think that the Knights of Lastwall is a great setting. One thing that stood out to me is the effort to put in a comprehensive feel. Like they have the slang among the Knights of Lastwall. Did you see that?
Yeah, that's
They
good.
Yeah, and even though when you think a knight order, you think a bunch of people in plate mail and shining shields on a steed. It's actually a lot more diverse than that. There's roles for any roles, for stealthy roles, for magic users, for combat users. But yes, I definitely agree that it did a good job of creating a feel. It's almost like a mini campaign setting. You could have a diverse array of characters just within this Knights of Lastwall setting.
Yeah, there's enough here so that if you, it's, I almost wanted to play what was happening here, like
Mhm.
like this, the sun, and you're guarding, keeping the lich in place, and suddenly hell breaks loose,
Yes.
and you're trying to not only fight off all the invading undead, but also you're trying to survive because everything's being destroyed around you. There's lots of chaos, a lot of destruction going on. But I really enjoy this. There's so much, and again, it's only 14 pages, but there's just so much information there. I sometimes have to stop and think about what I'm reading because it's just it's
Yeah, it's a
happening
lot
really
to take
fast.
in. Hmm.
But it's written very well. Like it wasn't, sometimes information like that could be very overwhelming. I didn't feel that so much. I wanted to learn
Right.
more.
Hmm.
Um, Chapter two, Among the Knights. Um, it, a great section, about 40 pages, and it goes into the different. So it's not just, so it tells you right away that knights, the way it's presented here, are not really the same way we think of knights, like maybe in Dragonlance or even going further back, like King Arthur and stuff like that. Anyone, almost of any class, can be a knight. It's not a knight. It's not a class. It's more like a title, and and then among that, there's these different factions that you could join that has different goals. Even though it's similar, but it's just different perspective, different takes on it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought one of the most interesting dynamics is the division between the Shining Sentinels, which are closer to what most people think of as paladins, the knight in shining armor, and the other major faction called the Crimson Reclaimers. One is more protective of the innocent, while the other, the Crimson Reclaimers, are more destruction of evil. And there's a bit of a philosophical difference between the two. Uh, I thought that, and also thought it was really interesting that they have the little sub factions also, like the Vulture Knights, who are all dedicated to Pharasma, the goddess of death. No, I'm sorry, that's the last epitaph. That's who they are. They're
Mhm.
the knights who are. And I thought that the different factions added a bit of diversity. You have even the non-combat factions like the Copperheads, who handle all of their coin because you need money to repair armor and stuff,
Mhm.
and the factions of Goblin Knights and the Charcoal Knight. I think all hobgoblins in like this rock-like armor. I thought it was interesting, and I thought it added a lot of diversity.
Yeah, I definitely uh, took a great liking to the Crimson Reclaimers, just because I guess my own personal philosophy. Like I don't like to wait to do something good before
Mm-hmm.
something bad happens. I want to do something now. Not a very patient person, I realized. But I like the idea of rangers and rogues, of like just trying to get revenge in a sense, like trying to
Right.
just go straight in, kind of like an arrow, and trying to pierce. Just they're not going back and resting and waiting to gather forces. Just nope, we're going straight there, straight to the isle where the lich is, and try to take him out ourselves. And it is also other parts here, different how faith comes into play, notable figures. There was one character. Let me see if I could find uh, who she is. It
Ileana
was
Testake.
yes.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I read that section and I thought that in particular had a lot of potential. There's a character who, among the Knights of Lastwall, is someone who is a vampire who is trying not to be a vampire. And I read how she's trying to search for a cure for vampirism. And as a GM, that's like, there's so much potential uh, in a campaign where you have this major figure who is looking for a cure for her vampirism. Also, it talks about how she lost her family's ancestral sword in the effort to cure her vampirism. And I thought, like, as from a GM's perspective, I thought there was a lot of potential there also.
I think that it's great that there's an NPC like that available, so that because I will have players that will play something like a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're trying to find like, okay, where can I have a character play this where with some NPCs to help build up the backstory, and I thought that she's a great tool for that.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think she was my favorite NPC
yes,
that I saw in the book.
the other ones I like, Buttons and Fen Tunwalker, the couple, the
Yes.
gnomes. Uh, I like them a lot, but I can't help thinking, oh, they're gonna have a terrible end. I just maybe just
Yeah.
the
Well, one thing it mentioned, so for people watching or listening, there's a gnome and a halfling who are married, and they were at odds, and they both went missing for a week, and when they came back, they were married. And once again, as a GM, I see a lot of plot potential as far as because they never tell us what happened during that week where they both ended up missing. And I could imagine doing a campaign about that links to whatever happened for that week. I just think there's a lot of potential for imagination there. Overall, I did enjoy reading. In fact, the only book I enjoyed as much reading the NPCs is probably Absalom with their troll, barber, criminal mastermind, and of course the book of major characters like Abigail Thrune, who rules Cheliax and stuff like that. But yeah, this book had some of the most interesting NPCs.
I totally agree. Chapter 3, Knights of Lastful Options. Again, it's if you've never played or heard of Pathfinder before and you're hearing this for the first time, again, knights here are not really a class. It's more like different mix of different archetypes and feats that characters can choose. And you can be a rogue, a ranger, a wizard, which is
Yes.
it's interesting trying to break these archetypes, these tropes, and just rethinking things at a very different level, and it's just exciting, but yeah, there's night vigilant feats if you want to make something more classical, I guess you could say, when it comes to
Right.
knights. There's the night reclaimant feats where they're more, I would say, more roguish. That's typical for the Crimson Reclaimers.
Yeah, they take a much more guerrilla tactics approach.
And the Lastwall Sentry feats, where they're the ones that the feats that pretty much dedicate to protecting and keeping watch. So of these, any of these stand out to you?
Yes, we were talking about how well this ties into the Book of the Dead. And there's one ability as an example for this that allows someone to imbue their weapon with positive energy.
Mm.
It's something you can do once per turn, but it allows you to do 1d6, I think, extra damage to undead. There was another item that was a detector stone, which is a stone that detects undead within a 30-foot radius. Uh, yeah, I liked a lot of the stuff. Um, I remember so many people, so many times I have players who want to dress a certain way. They think they're characters. And I saw that there was an item that's basically an armored skirt. And they
Mm.
were like, and I've so many players are like, I want to wear a skirt, but but I'm a fighter. And it seems like it was right up their alley, just in terms of fun
Mm.
for how you think your character look. So I really liked a lot of the items and the abilities that were available.
Hmm. There's certain feats that I stood out to. Now I tend to really pick abilities that are very flashy.
Mhm.
Instant armor, which is a feat you get at 10, um, is interesting that you could just call upon your armor when you need it. You take about 10. You need to do a 10-minute ritual at first to have it go to a extra dimensional space, your armor, and you can just call it back anytime. I just think that
Oh
with
yes.
so it's interesting. I'm surprised it's not more of a reclaiming thing because that to me is a very sneaky thing. But the
Mhm.
fact that I could just this be awesome that this person coming into an establishment and they take has normal clothes and suddenly there's danger and suddenly just calls their armor to come in and just his
Yeah,
or her and it comes in.
that's a really cool idea. And I noticed that in a lot of my games, for example, there's at least one scene that takes place in a ball or a fancy event. And I've had many a time a player like, oh, I'm not wearing my armor. I wish I could. Oh, it's going down at this ball.
Hmm.
And yes, I think my players would love something like that. That is such a good idea.
They like the Tyrant Falls, which is a 20th level feat, which probably most characters won't have. But I just again, it's more of a thematic thing with me, like the
Mhm.
idea that all right, this is the final battle. It's like when He-Man or She-Ra throws out the sword and calls, for I have the power, and it's I don't
Mhm.
I think that's cool. Um, and so then there's a lot of abilities like that where it's again it's almost about drama, if that makes sense.
Yes. One that particularly stands out is there's a feat that lets you inspire the people around you if they see you drop an undead.
Mm.
It's called, I believe it's called Defiance or something like that. You'll have to buy the book to see exactly what I mean. But basically, it's an ability that almost works like bardic inspiration, but it's like your comrades see you fell and undead and they become inspired and they get bonuses to hit and damage, and that's their trigger.
Is there anything else about this chapter that you want to highlight?
Oh, it's called Hilt Hammer. I thought it was interesting. It was a feat that allowed you to use your slashing or piercing weapon also as a blunt weapon. So if you have like a long sword, you can fight with it in a way that you do blunt damage, which is really good for fighting skeletal things and things that are resistant to piercing or slashing damage. I thought that was a cool feat.
So the last chapter, Knights of Lastwall Efforts, which is a very interesting name. It's like the chapters for this. At first, you're not sure what they're leading into,
Mhm.
um, but this is a pretty much your campaign section, your game master section, to build really like intricate stories. Some of these sections detail a lot of the major lands where the undead reside, the Gravelands, Eye of Dread, some things that was happening in some other places like Absalom, the Broken Lands, and Shining Kingdom. And what's great is that each section talks about major areas, shows you a
Right.
map,
Mhm.
shows you the major areas and cities where things are happening, gives you a lot of venture seeds to choose from. And what's great, even some of them have charts, which I love. I love random charts for things where you just roll and you just random encounters happen. What are your thoughts about this chapter?
I actually really like this chapter because I saw a lot of the stuff alluded to in other source books, like what's happening in the Graveland, what's going on with Tar-Baphon, the Whispering Tyrant. And for one, I felt like this section answered a lot of the questions that I had. And also, once again, always thinking from the perspective of a GM, you have a city that was prosperous and it was ruined. And not only are there roving packs of undead, but there are also brigand humans picking the ruins clean. And it sets my imagination afire of what strange things could have been lost in the Gravelands, and now the party has to go in and get it. Um, I thought it did a good job of fleshing out the environment of the Gravelands, the Isle of Terror, and realistically the surrounding nations and how they have to deal with the rise of the Whispering Tyrant.
I love that in each section is also like on the sidebar there's a bunch of NPC information,
Mhm.
contacts you have there, possible enemies, and so forth. I thought that was very well done. So again, this section, if you're looking for like very detailed like dungeon delving stuff, you're not gonna find it here. This is really great, especially if you love homebrew, but you just kind of
Mhm.
need a bit of a direction of where to go.
Yeah,
You know, this is packed with just great ideas that for game masters that are just don't not really feeling the adventure paths, but there's just things you could just uh, around with, play around with and explore. Also, Golarion is a very big world, and sometimes you will have player characters. I know I do sometimes where they like, hey, let's just go to this part of the world and you know we need to find something there, and I have to like homebrew on the spot what's going to happen. And now I'm glad there's stuff like this where like if something does happen, I just need a 5 minute break, kind of look at what's happening over here real fast, and have something ready so that this part of the world feels very different from where they came from.
absolutely. I feel you on that. 99% of my stuff is always homebrewed. And so I'm always put on the spot. And I often perform with a lot of comedians uh, that I play D&D. My whole roleplay group is stand-up comics. And
Oh,
they can be very spontaneous and chaotic neutral in real life. And so I have to be prepared because it's like herding drunken anarchist cats sometimes. But yeah, absolutely. This is a great resource to give you some vague idea for when you have to make some stuff up on the fly.
hmm. So yeah, again, this is 128 pages. What were your last thoughts about the book? Would you say it's a must buy?
Yes, I think that if you are planning to run a campaign that is set in Golarion and you're not just using the rules, you're actually using the setting, I think if you're looking for source material for that, this is some of the best. It's some of the most important because it is hitting at the heart of probably the main plot of Pathfinder. And so, whether you want to deal with the main plot of Pathfinder or whether you want to run a campaign that is branching off of that, I think that this would be a good book to buy. Also, if you're a player and you're looking for more crunch, I do like a lot of the feats and items in this book.
Hmm. I like this book a lot, and I also say it's a must buy because I some time ago I did pick up the Pathfinder Society guide,
Yeah.
and I was trying to show my players about it, and there were certain things they liked about it, but as a whole, they weren't really feeling it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But when I mentioned this and I mentioned to them what this book entails, something about lost causes seems much
Yes.
more
Mm-hmm.
enticing than just a regular dungeon delve. Yeah, that's cool once in a while, but if you want, my players really love good story.
Mm-hmm.
So this gives them exactly what they're looking for, something that they feel like their backs are against the wall. So they have to be really careful what happens here.
My characters like a good story. My players, they like a good story also. Um, they spend more time messing around probably than your players do. But yes, I would say that if your players like a good story, there's infinite amount of resources here.
Oh, so I guess, oh, so yeah, overall, I definitely recommend this book. Any last words before we wrap up?
I would like to say, Fergie. I would like to say, yeah, I would definitely recommend because I think the story of Galarian and Pathfinder is what most attracted me to the setting, to playing Pathfinder. And I think this is a vital part. And so if you're keeping up with the story of Pathfinder and you want to have all the pieces, I would definitely recommend picking up this book.
All right, everyone. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the review. Stay tuned as we continue to look more into the new Pathfinder books coming out. So yes, stay safe, everyone, and have a great day.